according to the Muslims, all religious traditions have told about the end of time. There is a hadith in which the Prophet said, no prophet has come except that he told his people that time would come to an end, and there would be certain signs. Now, to go into some of the signs, there are basically, the scholars have identified three types of signs. Signs that have already occurred, signs that have occurred and continue to intensify, and then signs that haven't occurred.
Qamar is the name of the 54th surah in the Quran. That means moon in English. The first verse of this surah is considered to contain a most important message on the subject of the end times. The hour has drawn near, and the moon has split.
In Sahih al-Bukhari, Auf ibn Malik, he reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, look for 6 incidents before the last day. First, my death. Then, and this is of course true, the Prophet died. Then the conquest of Jerusalem, and the Muslims conquered Jerusalem.
But Muslims saved their most monumental feat for the holy city of Jerusalem.
Islam's first great work of art is the Dome of the Rock. It was built in a city that was holy to Christians and Jews, and it's spectacular.
In 16 years after the hijrah of the Prophet, an epidemic broke out, it's well known about, and 70,000 people died. Wealth became plentiful after that, especially during the Caliphate of Uthman, and after that in the time of Umar ibn Abdulaziz, as is so famous. When the collectors of zakat, they found no one who was poor enough to receive the zakat. There was no one poor enough to receive zakat money. That's how wealthy the Muslims had become, and that's the prosperity Islam brought to the world at the time. And this is exactly what happened. Also, after the rebellious war against Uthman, things became worse after his murder, and it is true that none of the Arab families were saved from the fitna of that, from the trials and the tribulations. After the murder of Uthman, there was not one family that except it was involved in it, just as the Prophet ﷺ had said.
the aftermath of a devastation that descended upon them not from the west, but from the east. It's known as the Mongol catastrophe. The Mongols were Turco-Mongolian nomads from the steppes of Central Asia. It wasn't long before they entered Islamic Persia. On February the 10th, 1258, the Mongols took Baghdad.
Historically, the most significant thing about the Mongols for us would be that they became Muslims, most of them, in the end, converted to Islam, and then became, after being these tremendously destructive forces, some of the greatest patrons of the arts and letters in all of Islamic history.
There was a fire that the Prophet predicted in Medina, which was a result of a volcano that erupted. And he said that Medina would be confronted with a massive fire, and that occurred. He said that the fall of Constantinople, which occurred 800 years after the Hadith was recorded, he said the fall of Constantinople was a sign.
And the Prophet said that the Muslims would conquer Rome and Constantinople. And the Prophet was asked which was first, and he said the city of Heraclius, which of course means Constantinople. And that is absolutely true. Of course, Rome has never been taken by the Muslims, and then I suppose this is something we'll have to say that every Muslim will believe this is still something that is due to happen sometime in the future. Okay, but Constantinople certainly was conquered by the Muslims.
Then a sultan came to power whose dreams of conquest would not be denied. History would honor him as Mehmet, the conqueror.
When on the death of his father, he finally then took over. It meant an enormous change in the policy and direction of the Ottoman Empire, in the direction of a much greater energy.
Mehmet immediately set his sights on the one prize as grand as his ambitions.
Mehmet had to conquer Constantinople. There was no other choice. Constantinople was sitting like a perfect gem or a perfect fruit waiting to be picked.
To stop Mehmet's ships from approaching, the Byzantines strung a massive chain across the strait. On April 22nd, 1453, the besieged city watched in horror as Mehmet's troops hoisted 70 of his ships ashore, sliding them over land on greased planks past the barrier chain. Shortly before dawn on May 29, 1453, the Turkish army breached the walls of the city. Within hours, Constantinople was in the hands of the Ottomans. Mehmet rode into the city.
And what is noteworthy here is that these predictions were made at a time again when the Prophet, no one could imagine that the Muslims were going to do such things.